You've been under a lot of pressure in situations when it comes to playing in those teams. How do you stay so cool in those moments?
Leadership can be complex, can be chaotic, can be a lot of pressure with it. And, there's that old saying that leadership is lonely, and it can be lonely.
Has there been points in your life or in your career where you've felt like shit?
But that's where you learn the most about yourself. They say that success is a pretty poor teacher and failure is one of the best teachers. So
can you take us back to a time when you felt like you weren't at your best, that you had to put all these things into practice?
Probably the big one's the turning point for me being open to the idea of meditation and mental skills. So
Ian Pryor, partner with Lizzie, to being a father.
Yeah, I guess it's a great question. I think I'm still navigating it now, to be fair, like most parents, making it up on the run.
I love your process, your little shimmy. What's going through your head at that moment? What does it look like? Talk us through what's going on in your brain.
Please go through. It's what's going through my brain.
Get through. Just go through.
Yeah.
Each one of those parts of your life has so much to it, and it's definitely been really interesting, I suppose, to watch you in the transitions to all of those. Obviously, haven't been there in all of it, but when we met, you were playing for the Western Force, and not long after that, when I asked you to come on today, the reason why I say that you're one of the the best leaders I know is because I've watched you for so long be a leader. And I know that seems like an interesting thing to say, but it can be such a broad kind of, people think that they're a leader, and people think that they can lead teams, and they can lead, through conflict, or they can lead through challenging times. But, I found it really important when we're having this conversation today. Your life has been, so many ups and downs. There's been so many interesting different things. And like you said, you've gone from being a teammate, being a brother, and being a partner to Yorko, Lizzie, who's amazing, and then now to being a father. So you've navigated so many different things. And I know that so many of our listeners can resonate with, those transitions. So I've got a lot of questions to ask you.
Let's go for it.
I can imagine you've got a lot of insight to share. One of the first ones I think that definitely comes to mind is you've played for a lot of different teams over your time, and you've probably seen how different teams show up, or how they create culture. What has been the thing that you've learned from being an athlete, being a professional athlete, aside from, being a professional in, the space that you're in now? How has that been different, and what has been different from those things that you've seen with those?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, I think I've been lucky enough to have, going way back, a couple of parents that, took a bit of a bold step in terms of immigrating over to Australia to try and give their future kids a greater chance at life and more opportunities. And was born in Bundaberg, spent a few years there before we moved back to Zimbabwe to be closer to family, and then came back in 2000. So I guess the leadership side probably starts with them, watching mum and dad run a small business, while putting their kids through school, and had a maniac like me that wanted to go to every training and do every sport possible, and they were, never said no. On top of running a small business, being responsible for staff, their livelihoods, on top of obviously the responsibility of being parents as well. So watching that juggle, I had a great couple of, examples of what it looks like to me. And then throughout my sporting journey, I was lucky enough to have, some of the best leaders in Australian rugby. So I started out the Reds with James Hoare, who was the captain there, where we were lucky enough to win the title of Super Rugby in 2011. Went to the Brumbies, which was renowned for its culture, and meeting greats of the game like Stephen Larkham, George Krieg, and George Smith. All these incredible athletes I watched on TV. Now they were just like normal human beings, and the way they interacted and their real authenticity about them really stuck out to me. And learning off guys like Stephen Moore and Ben Mowen, who's the captain there, who went on to captain the Wallabies, was a really cool experience. And then obviously coming over to the Western Force, learning off a guy like Matt Hodgson, who's a club legend, and then, obviously transitioning through into a skipper down the track. So I've had some great mentors, some great people to learn from, ask really silly questions sometimes and learn from, which was really great. And then now in my role at Metal Global, now I'm learning off two really sharp operators in Tim Curtis and Ben Pronk, formerly SAS officers with MBAs now, and their extended team, and Andy, who's the practice manager for emergency response, and Jen Hammond, who's head of our program. So yeah, I guess I've just been really lucky, time and place, to learn off some incredible people and, take what I think might work in my regard and what might work for me as a leader and try and implement that, throughout my sporting journey and throughout my life.
With the Western Force when it was taken out of the competition. And there's been so many moments where I think a lot of people would have taken a different direction or taken it a different way. There's two things, that come up when I think about that. I suppose when it comes to game day, or when we're having the conversation, for people who are listening, speaking about leadership and mindset, there are a lot of challenges that people face, I think, in the world at the moment, especially in the resource sector, where people feel the weight of the world on their shoulders. They feel the pressure of being a family man or, a partner, and they feel like they have to show up the best they possibly can in every situation and in every hat that they kind of wear. You've been under a lot of pressure on game days or in situations when it comes to playing in those teams. How do you stay so cool in those moments? Is it something that you were naturally drawn to and being able to handle those, or is it something that you learned from all of the, the different teams and the different people that you've been able to work with?
Yeah, it's a real combination, a mixture of all the above. I think, as athletes, we're pretty lucky and, unlucky as well sometimes that you're getting judged on your competency of your role and responsibility every week in front of an audience. So, that can come with pressure. So a lot of it's about frequency of exposure and then the environment you're in. So, whether the team and the organisation have facilitated how to give you the tools to perform under pressure, and is your environment psychologically safe where you can do that and be yourself on top of, organisational expectations and contractual expectations and the pressure that comes with being an athlete, because it's an interesting space, right? We all start playing team sport to be part of a team, be something bigger than ourselves, which is why we kept playing and why we started playing, why we keep playing throughout the journey. But then professional sport, you become almost your own individual asset, because now it's it's a corporate thing in terms of contracts and those kind of things, which is, your way of life. So, I guess the ability to develop tools and frameworks and develop your mindset around that comes from being exposed to it and then doing your own work on top of the team, putting in that work, and the organisation putting that work into you as well, because you're part of that team and you're part of, their assets. So the better they can prepare you and the better you can prepare yourself, the better you're going to contribute to the team and the organisation, which leads to, a greater chance of success. So I reckon those are some really big ones. And leadership is it can be complex, can be chaotic, can be a lot of pressure with it. And, there's that old saying that leadership is lonely. It can be lonely, depending on how tough it might be going in a situation or how good it might be going. It can be a lonely role at times, but one that I've always enjoyed doing. And I was lucky enough, I think, from, school age to be captain of teams, and so I got a bit of exposure coming through school there, where you're playing with your mates and you're leading your mates, and then into the professional realm was almost a similar but also a different spectre, because you got corporate sponsor expectation, organisational expectation, and the pressure you place on yourself as a professional athlete as well.
And you bring up so many different things in that, is that one of the things that kind of sticks out to me when you speak about it is being an athlete, you're your own asset and you're a part of a team, and that goes with anywhere, in a workplace or in a family dynamic. And I think the toughest thing about being a human is, having to put that mask on yourself first and making sure that you're okay so that you can show up better. But it's something that, unless you're conscious about doing that, it's not something that we naturally tend to do.
Yeah.
What is it that for people who are struggling with that, so they've got a workplace that they don't necessarily enjoy, maybe a team that isn't necessarily coming home with the wins all the time.
Yeah.
How can you shift? Has there been points in your life or in, your career where you've felt like shit? Things don't seem to be going well, or maybe actually things are going well and you're still feeling like shit. Are there things that you do, conversations that you have, or practices that you put in place for those moments, from those moments that you've had in the past?
Yes, probably a few too many tough periods throughout my career, and certainly I think any professional athlete's career. but that's where you learn the most about yourself. You know, they say that success is a pretty poor teacher and failure is one of the best teachers. So I think first and foremost is how you're framing that pressure and framing sort of when you come up short or you're going through tough periods, like this is a real opportunity to learn here. So probably your mindset towards it is a big one. And then in terms of personal, coping strategies and mechanisms I sort of developed over the years, a big one was meditation, which I got into in 2015, which I really enjoyed and started off with, downloading a free Headspace app because of a neuroscience study that I came across in an elective that I was doing for university, where there was a study, right, and you had a group of weightlifters. Group A did weights 4 times a week, Group B did weights once a week, and then visualized 3 times a week, and they MRI'd their brain wave activity and all this kind of stuff. And being the meathead I was in 2015, it's just fitter, faster, stronger. That's all that there is to it. Couldn't believe the outcome of the study. It was a 2% difference in the improvement that both groups made. So here I was thinking that the 4 times a week would blast it out of the water, but really reps are reps, and your mind doesn't know the difference between you doing it for real or you visualizing it, as long as you keep practicing it and you make that visualization as realistic as possible in your mind. Meditation, visualization, definitely 2 tools that I developed. And then one that I came to, towards the last few years of my career was journaling and gratitude. I think, you can be in this bubble of professional sport and anything in life. You feel like you're under pressure or you're in a tough spot, whatever it may be. You feel like you're in your own little bubble, but that ability, to be grateful for things that you do have in life and things that are in your life, whether it's, having a cup of coffee as the sun rises when you're on site, being grateful, have a moment to do that, because no one gets to do that in life, see the sunrise every morning, having access to drinking water, cups of coffee and things like this. Like, we are pretty privileged in Australia for what we have access to. So, sometimes being able to remove yourself from that little situation that you've sort of built up in your head, and there can be pressure around that, that ability to step away from a gratitude perspective and, be grateful, and the neurochemical and dopamine, oxytocin hit that you get from that's pretty powerful. And then on top of that, journaling, like it's a great tool. There's a lot of literature out there about what it does for emotional regulation. It's almost like having your own little therapist there, where you're talking through it and you're writing through your journal, and you're sort of processing it on the run, and that has a great effect on your emotional regulation. So those were a few tools I developed individually, and then I think the people you surround yourself with in your environment, so family, friends, they're also, there's a lot of literature out there about that. And how the social support side can, help alleviate stress and pressure and feel supported, because we are community-based organisms as human beings. So we are used to being around a community, and that's what we thrive and that's what we need. Just blabbered on a bit there, but there are a few of the tools that I was lucky enough to develop throughout my career.
Not at all. Didn't blabber on. You know me. Loves a chat. Loves a blab on.
That's right.
But even when you speak about meditation, I remember when we first met, I was working at F45 and Lizzie was working at F45 as as a trainer and also dietitian for the Western Force. And at that point in my life, I'd made a transition from being a photographer. I had a lot of not so good habits. I was still drinking a fair bit. I certainly wasn't meditating. I'd started training with, doing F45, and having met Hodjo and started working for that, I was just surrounded by a lot of athletes where I hadn't necessarily been surrounded by that before. And I remember, my life dramatically changing when I was surrounded by people who were doing things to better their life, or, athletes or people who are high performing are doing things differently, and showing up in different ways. And I remember you introduced meditation to me I remember it wasn't like, Becky, you've got to meditate, go and do it now. It wasn't a telling me that I have to do those things. I remember you were sharing about what was working for you and having asked questions about how you were able to show up that way. And that's what I think that's what I love about you, is the way that you lead, or the way that you show up as, in work and as an athlete, is the way that you show up in your personal life as well. You don't tell people, you show people, and you show up with such integrity. And I know that can be a really challenging thing to do and be in the world, especially when you're faced with, challenges and things happen in life that are unfair or feel unfair. But thank you for being that person in my life. And I know that, when we speak about that, it's causing that ripple effect for other people. When you speak about meditation, when you speak about visualization, I know that, in some of the toughest points of life, and, I'm a glutton for punishment. I hope you're okay for me to take you there. When you speak about it, can you remember, can you take us back to a time when you felt like you weren't at your best? Can you talk us through what was happening in those moments, or a real tangible kind of time that you had to put all these things into practice to be able to show up as the person you wanted to be instead of the person that you were at the time?
Yeah, sure. So I think probably the big one's the turning point for me being open to the idea of meditation and mental skills. So, 2015 when I discovered it, so going back a little bit, I was lucky enough to play Australian under-20s, play at the Queensland Reds, did quite well there as a team, and then go to the Brumbies and we made the grand final. So I ticked like quite a few successful team boxes, but I hadn't really felt like I'd established myself individually at that level as well as I wanted to. And so, I was pretty desperate to get hold of a starting jersey consistently, improve myself, and, because we're competitive beasts in professional sport, and, show that you belong. And I remember finally getting a chance, a game against the Chiefs, and, it's sort of been applying my time, working away, grafting, working hard on my game, being a good teammate, and then finally got my chance against this team that was the team that beat us in the Brumbies a couple of years before in the grand final. So a really good team, and got the chance to start, was named vice captain. I thought, here's my chance. I'm going to grab this and run with it with both hands. And I remember being in the game, and we'd had a really good start. Don't think we'd ever really beaten them previously to that at their home ground. It's a bit of a fortress. And so we were leading, we were playing really well. I was having an okay game myself, and just remember having this moment like, I'm going to go in for the kill. Like, no one's going to get this jersey, blah, blah, blah. So essentially went from, state of flow to, overreaching psychologically, and got caught up a bit awkwardly in a tackle, got red carded, and got suspended because of it. It was my first and only ever card in rugby since I was basically 14. So it was a pretty gut-wrenching moment, to finally got the chance and basically dropped it with both hands. And so I remember going away from that and being like, I've got to do something different. I can't really get fitter, faster, or stronger. I've squeezed the lemon as much as I can on this pretty average, athletically gifted body, but there's got to be something more out there, and, came across that neuroscience subject. And I'd heard, mental skills were starting to drip feed itself through the rugby union ecosystem with, the All Blacks and how they had Gilbert and Oka and all this kind of stuff. And always thought of mental skills as, everyone singing Kumbaya and kind of meditating and in a circle, that kind of thing up in Nimbin on the eastern seaboard over there. But yeah, having the openness to actually say, hey, I've got to try something different, that was a real turning point for me. And I think, from there, went from out of the squad, suspended, basically couldn't get back in the squad after that, to the next year, being lucky enough to have the vice captain role again, was the goal kicker and starting by the back end of the next year. And just, I honestly don't think if I'd found or been open to getting into meditation, visualization, I would have had the career longevity that I have had and been able to play as long as I have, because it's just been a great tool, like you said, for when times are tough, whether it's been, when I ruptured my pec and I'm coming back from that, I'm visualizing tackling, I'm visualizing being back out in the field and, painting that picture and showing that Northern Star, like there is an end point to this tough period, like let's keep pushing. And that's from a professional perspective, but also from a personal perspective, like, everyone visualizes differently, but I sort of visualize, a bit of professional stuff and then personal, like happy, healthy, successful, and what that looks like for me. So, happy to me, is obviously just having a good presence around yourself, being grateful for what you've got in life. Healthy is, kind of speaks for itself, being able to run around with the kids. And then successful is just, at the moment, for me, the way I visualize walking in the house and dog's wagging his tail, he's happy to see me, Lizzie and the kids are happy to see me, and that's what it looks like to me. And then obviously that carries over into your subconscious. So hopefully you are doing that more than you're not doing that even when times are tough. Mm-hmm. And I guess just that tool and that turning point really sort of changed my professional and personal life, I think. And, I was able, and I noticed a difference from that meditation that year, because I built up from not being able to sit still from 5 minutes to 30 minutes, probably only get 10 minutes in now because of the kids, and try and get done before everyone's awake and eating their Wheat Bix for breakfast. But immediately in that year, I noticed the difference in the way I was able to hold conversations with people, because someone wouldn't say a particular word and I'd sort of go off on a tangent and be like in my own daydream while still talking, and then was able to come back. My university scores went up and I just felt, calmer, more present, and just couldn't believe the effects it had. So I reckon that was probably the big turning point for me. And then I was able to use it as a tool when, times were tough, whether it was selection or injury, or even going through this transition, right? Like I've been lucky enough to do what I love for 14 years. And before that, I was pretty set on being a professional athlete before that for another 4 years. So it's almost like 20 years, right? And now you sort of like, the music stops. What are you going to do now? How are you going to find purpose in this world? How are you going to provide value to this world? How are you going to put food on the table for the family? All these kinds of things. But being able to use the tools like meditation, journaling, visualization, and then also just exercising, like that's a big one for me, having trained professionally for 14 years and probably another 4 years before that trying to become professional. It's a huge part of my day. So if I don't really get some kind of exercise in, be it really passive or active, on top of the other coping strategies, I feel like I can't do as much. Whereas if I am able to do that, meditate in the morning, do a little bit of gym or some exercise, do some journaling, and maybe have an ice bath in there for a bit of a dopamine hit, you feel like you can almost do anything. You feel superhuman. So I think, like I've gone on a bit there, but finding what works for you individually is a big one, whether it is journaling, whether it's just finding a mindful moment when you're having your morning cup of coffee, just to be present, not thinking about how many things you've got to do in the day, but thinking, oh, how good does this coffee taste? How lucky am I to see the sun come up? Things like that, and trying to find those tools, because everyone's different. So what works for everyone is different. What works for me wouldn't work necessarily for you, and vice versa. So, being open to trying these things, I think, is the first thing, and being self-aware, like, oh, maybe I can, improve here or improve there, and then having the courage to do it as well.
You touched, and I love all of that, and you're right. What works for some people doesn't necessarily work for other people. But I think we all find resonance or something that resonates with us in other people's journey and other people's stories. So you touched on so many different things there. I heard a lot from that, and
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it was great. And I wanted to touch on, you spoke about selection and the stress that comes from that. And I know, having watched it and being a part of the community a little bit more, and having insight of actually how cutthroat it can be.
Yeah.
You could be performing at your best, you could be showing up the best way you possibly can, your reputation could be the best. Somebody comes from either a different country, they know someone, like when we're speaking about the resource sector, somebody knows somebody better than you know them, or there's politics involved, or there's so much that goes with being in a sporting team and also being in the workplace, where it can feel like it's unfair. Things are stacked against you. What is it that brings you back to center and brings you back to, going down the path of where it's not fair, or, it doesn't seem like there's much more else you can do? What is your advice for people, I suppose, on how to navigate those hard situations where it feels like it's a little bit beyond your control?
Yeah, it's a fascinating one, isn't it? And I think there's a few ways you can look at it. I think A is having the ability to recognize that, this is hard. Like, life isn't fair, and life isn't always easy. And this period is quite difficult. But the main thing I think it comes down to, personally, from what I've experienced in professional sport, is locus of control. Like, what can I actually control here? Like, I can't control where there is a bit of favoritism, or I can't control this X, Y, and Z. But what I can control is how I show up, the energy I'm going to put into getting better than I was yesterday, the energy I'm going to put into my teammates to being a good teammate or a good workmate, whether it's a good leader as a leader, or a good follower as someone who's maybe just starting out on site or within the team. And focusing on that is the biggest thing you can do, because you can control that. You can influence outcomes, obviously, but you've got to be able to focus on what you can control before you can do that. There's nothing worse in professional sport where, you've had a shocker of a game on a Saturday, and, Monday review's coming, and then, some teams or coaches used to have what we call like the text of doom on like a Tuesday morning, where it's like, hey mate, can you come pop in and see me for a minute? Well, you knew what was coming, right? Yeah, like anxiety's running through your veins, and you can just feel the butterflies in your stomach, whether it's like a clip that is coming up where you've royally made a huge mistake or something, or you're out of the squad, or you're out of the 23 because you've made a mistake and error, but you can't change that. So okay, what can I do better? I did this wrong. okay, what am I going to do this week to fix that in terms of like skill wise or attitude wise, X, Y, and Z. So I guess it's the main thing it comes down to there, both personally and professionally, is what can I control? Yep, I can control, like I said, my effort, my attitude, and my relationships and how I'm building those relationships with those around me.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And you're under a pressure a lot, watching you play, you're a kicker as well. And one of the most high pressure situations as an athlete is, in any game with a ball, is that moment where you're getting an opportunity to go for goal or for a point.
Correct, yeah.
And, I love your process, your little shimmy.
Little butt wobble,
you do the two-step and then you do the little shimmy. He's getting into his headspace to be able to, to get that goal or to get that point. What's going through your head at that moment? Is that something that, a psychologist or a coach or someone helped you form, or is it something that you formed? So what does it look like? Talk us through what's going on in your brain.
Please go through is what's going on in my brain.
Get through. Just go through.
Yeah. No.
And is it visualization? So touching on that, is it visualize? So what's going on in your brain? Where did it come from?
Yeah, so the first part, so to give people context, like when you score a try, you've essentially got 90 seconds to pick the ball up, come back to your mark, might be 20 meters back, and try and get your heart rate down from like 180 to 200 down to, a sufficient level where you can execute your fine motor skills a little bit better. On top of, you've just made that error, or you're feeling $1 million because you've scored the try, and coming back to that, almost homeostasis level of like, state of flow, slow, controlled breathing, even though your heart wants to pump and there's, adrenaline and everything running through your veins. So the first thing I do after the try score is try and pick up the ball, get my hands on the ball, what that feels like to bring you back into that moment. Mm-hmm. I'll pick up a bit of grass and a bit of soil and rub it between my hands, which is a grounding technique that I kind of developed, which I did through a sports psychologist early in my career, and, about trying to bring you back to the moment, whether you've made an error or you've done something really good to bring you back to that moment. I kind of stole that off Gladiator, like, when he picks up the sand and he rubs it before he walks out into his arena.
Love that. So you're basically a gladiator when you're on field. Yep,
yeah, well, I just pretend like the rugby field was our arena, right? Mm-hmm. Like nowhere near the bravery of the gladiators back in the day, but it was a mechanism, right? Mm-hmm. And every player has different things for that. So I do those two things, and then I'm trying to slow my breath down because I'm breathing heavy. Generally, as a halfback, like a midfielder, you run around a lot, like a headless chook trying to do stuff. So I'm trying to bring the heart rate back down, so I've brought myself back into the moment, trying to slow my heart rate down, and then it's about into the process, which I've done since I was, 12 years old. So you've got thousands of reps in there trying to do that while trying to block out whether you did something good or bad in the game. If that game is to win, that kick is to win the game, the flow-on effects. So is your team going to make finals? Are we through? Like all these myriad of things that can come up within a kick. But at the end of the day, it's just you, yourself, the ball, the tee, and two uprights. And that's all it is. But trying to stay in that moment and not think about what's coming up next or what you've previously done, what old mate's telling you, how bad you are in the crowd or what you should be doing for a living, all this kind of stuff. But I really enjoyed those moments, like the harder the kick and the more pressure there was on, like, to make it, to win or to get a bonus point. Like, I really enjoyed those moments for some reason. Like, obviously it's something you practice since you're a young boy, so you probably want to be in those situations to test yourself under pressure. So I was quite lucky in that regard. But, there's been plenty of kicks where I've been like, I can feel my feet shaking and my hands are wobbling because there's a lot of pressure on that kick to win or whatever it may be. But again, focusing on what I can control. So I'll get to the top of my run up, I'll take a few steps back, I'll take a breath, and I'll go a few steps across, take a breath, come back, and I'll do a couple of breaths, do the butt wiggle, kind of settle into that's like my way I ground into the ground with the boots. So it's like pivoting. So I can feel my feet and my toes digging into the ground. Cool, I'm centered, I'm ready to go. And then I said what my dad used to tell me when I was 8-10 years old: head down, follow through, nice and easy. Because my dad, bless his soul, always used to be like, my boy, in Zimbabwean accent, he'd be like, there's a ref and there's 2 touch judges watching the ball. You don't have to watch where the ball goes after you kick. You just watch the ball on the tee and you kick it and you keep your head down after you follow through. So I've always tried to do that because it's what's worked, right? Like, I've had kicking coaches that have had little tweaks and added a little bit of layers as well, but the fundamental comes down to doing the basic movement and pattern really well under pressure. So the more basic you can do it, you can keep it, and the more you can rep it out that way, the more it feels like, familiarization, desensitization, all these kind of things that just make it like any other kick. I remember Christian Lealiifano, the kicker at the Brummies, always saying, like, once the ball's on the tee, that's it. You can't change anything. It's just you and the ball. So enjoy that moment. So, yeah, there's a few things there that I've done. And I guess you can transfer that to, if you're going to a board meeting or a staff meeting or, a hard conversation you're about to have, like, what's your process to, you're feeling a little bit flighty about the conversation, or if you're about to go have some hard feedback from a supervisor or a coach or a teacher, whatever it may be. Okay, cool. What's my breathing? Am I, doing a bit of box breathing? Am I rubbing my feet into the ground to bring me back to the moment, to really, get myself out of this state of fight or flight, bring me back to the present moment?
Yeah. I love all of that. And I love the opportunity to have the insight into, because as viewers, as somebody who's watching that, you make assumptions as to what's going through your mind, but I don't think I've asked that question of you before. Of what's
there's a method
actually,
to the madness.
Yeah.
It's not just a little booty shake for the sake of it. Yeah.
No, but like a little bit.
Yeah.
And something that watching yourself, you are an athlete that's able to get almost 100% of your capabilities. There are, there's athletes who are naturally born. They don't have to put any effort in. They don't have to have any practices whatsoever. They don't have to have the thought process, the wiggles and things like that. And they've had opportunities that have handed to them, and they're able to show up in 100% without putting as much effort in.
Yeah.
I know that, you are somebody who's able to get 100% from themselves. And I can imagine that would have been all those things that, from playing on different teams, from having different coaches, from having a beautiful family around you, whether that's mum and dad, your sister, but also now making that beautiful family with, Lizzie's family, who are also supportive. You've attracted that into your life. It didn't just fall into you, being able to create that. What I suppose is your advice, or what's one thing that people can do when they might feel like they haven't necessarily been given all the things that for success? They might not have had the right family growing up. They might not necessarily be able to flawlessly show up for things. What's your advice, or one piece of advice, or something that sticks out when I ask that question for somebody in that situation?
Yeah, again, great question. I guess it comes down to, focusing on yourself first, like working on yourself, whether that be both personally or professionally. I've said that a few times now, but, I think having that self-awareness and that self-regulation, that ability to say, like, doesn't matter, whether I'm picked for this team or whether I get this role, or, that's not going to dictate how I feel about myself in terms of competency or just general love for myself. Like, I'm still Ian Pryor, like not Ian Pryor, the rugby player, or the former Western Force captain, or the associate at Meta Global. Like, I'm just Ian Pryor. So how am I trying to get better myself, whether it's, health, happiness, whatever it may be? Focusing on that first, because I think once you focus on that, the other things happen organically when you're willing to put in the work. Like most people know, when you've got your eye on a goal and a target and you're putting in the work to get there, things naturally evolve around you, and you're not always going to get there straight away. There's a bit of an aspect of perseverance, of grit, and putting in the work there too. But having that ability to say, I'm going to work on myself, and I'm going to work on this, that, or the other, can allow you to attract those people into your life. Because if you're trying to work on your health, let's just say, for example, and you want to work on something around that, and you go sign up to a gym or a fitness class or a running club, whatever it may be, then you're around those like-minded people, and that has a flow-on ripple effect, because it's happening via osmosis now. You're around like-minded people, you're picking up things, now all of a sudden you're part of a community, you're building a bit of happiness now, and then a door might open up for X, Y, and Z, whether it's personally, professionally, from there. So yeah, I guess starting with that focus on yourself, and not necessarily trying to tie your self-esteem to achievements per se, but actually tying your self-esteem to that ability to put in the work and to enjoy that, it's a bit of a cliche, enjoying that journey and that process of trying to get better and trying to be better than you were yesterday, last month, last year, last 5 years. So I think that's an important part of it. And I think also a reflection part, because that's something I didn't think I did well at the start of my career, was sort of like reflecting back, okay, what did I do well that worked here? What wasn't so good? And what can I do better? That on top of the gratitude perspective of taking a moment to smell the roses, like, oh, like this was a really hard period. I was actually able to work my way through it. I had some great support. I did this work. I was able to put in X, Y, and Z to try and help myself out, to give yourself that little boost of confidence and that little, boost of self-esteem. It's like, hey, we can do this. And that great book, Man's Search for Meaning, is a great analogy in that for between stimulus and response, we have a choice. So you can't dictate what happens to you necessarily in life and the outcomes and the situations you might be in, but you can choose how you respond to it. And I've always loved that, because we all go through tough periods in life. We all go through speed bumps. It's all individual based, how it's perceived and whatnot, and what can happen. There's varying degrees of it, but ultimately you can still choose how you respond. And that one was a really powerful one I found, particularly for myself and others in professional sport. You'd see like a similar thing happen, whether you dropped from the team or dropped as captain or not get the contract you want or told, your time's up, and seeing the different ways people could react. Like ultimately it still is your choice, but how you doing the work to ensure that your cup is full almost, so you can take on extra things like that, I guess.
And you bring up such a good point. You can't choose what happens to you in life. It's how you respond. And one of the biggest things that I was lucky enough and also heartbroken to witness was the cut of the Western Force. Like, I'm sorry to make you relive potentially some of the most challenging, but like when you're speaking about how you respond. So going back to that point, how I got to live it was working, for F45, working for Hodjo. Hodjo had the intention of he was going to be retiring. It was going to be his last game. And then, the season was going to carry on. And there were whispers from the ARU that the Western Force was going to be cut from the competition, but there was also other teams that were going to be cut. And, you can speak into it a little bit better. But I remember, thinking that it was a potential. Or knowing it was a potential. Obviously, I wasn't a player whatsoever.
Yeah.
And then something that I didn't know until afterwards, that there were people who made the decision, like yourself, to stay loyal to the team, loyal to Perth and West Australian rugby, to stay, even though that was a possibility. So that is one thing, loyalty, speaking about loyalty. And in those moments, realizing and finding out that you guys found out at the same time as the public that the Western Force was no longer a part of the competition.
Correct, yep.
And that your whole life just changed. The potential of what was going to happen in your career and then where it ended up, just completely taken from underneath you, all of you as a team. Makes me teary. I remember that was a really obviously challenging for everybody that was involved. And I think the public didn't, quite understand how much you guys were kind of blindsided a little bit from that as well. So can we go back to that? It's really challenging. When we speak about it's not what happens to you in life, it's how you handle it. What made you stay? What made you not only stay, but trying your best to thrive in that moment? And your career then took a turn and a path to being a captain of the team after that.
Yep.
How do you come back from that?
Yeah, it was an interesting year, I guess, probably going back to when we first found out. We played this amazing game against the Kings, an African team, and I think it was like a 49-47 game, which is unheard of in rugby. So defence was definitely optional that day. It was absolutely entertaining affair. But coming off this amazing high and, with as a team high-fiving each other, celebrating like what a great game, to fans coming on the field saying, oh, have you seen the news? Like, we haven't been back in the change room yet, but we're celebrating this game. What are you talking about? Oh, apparently there's a team going to be removed next year and it's between us and the Rebels. So automatically you're going from this incredible high down to like, oh, what's going on here? came back in, coach explained the scenario, but it was sort of like brushed aside, like, oh, we're okay. Nothing will happen. We've got this legally binding agreement, et cetera, et cetera. Excuse me, it kind of drags on from there. And we get to the point where it ends up in federal court. Andrew Forrest steps in to, sort of say, hey, I'll back you to the hill kind of thing, which we're very lucky to have as sport. Otherwise, would have been dead in the water from the get-go. But I remember being at a cafe just near HQ there with a few teammates, Marcel Bracchi, Pet Cowan, a couple of others there, and just phone going off. And I was like, oh, it's a bit strange because we were meant to be finding out that day or the next day, but via the force in a meeting, because Rugby Australia or RU back then said that's how we were going to be informed. But somehow the news broke and it got out, but it popped up on Twitter. Like I remember it rolling up while we were having coffee at this cafe, like Western Force license revoked, effective immediately, essentially. Like, oh, okay, well. And just having a real hollow feeling after that, like, oh, that's it. We had this little bit of hope, and we were certainly all pretty excited that it might go our way, but it wasn't to be. And just, having that real hollow, like almost emotionless feeling, like almost a bit of shock, right? What is this? How can this be? And then, people obviously reacted all different ways, and some people had plan Bs ready to go in terms of other contracts they could take within Australia. But I just personally remember being almost not over rugby, but just a little bit perplexed by it. Like how can this be? Like, we're meant to be, rugby's always been based on values and, family and looking after each other. It's a team sport, right? Like everyone from every walk of life is welcome into, okay, now this team's been removed, but we found out via the internet. And obviously a bit of a victim mentality there, which always happens when you first find out. And
by right, like, to be fair.
Yeah, well, I guess it's like any time an organisation maybe gets scales back staff or, becomes defunct or whatever it may be. And, so after that, there's a few players that were keen to stick around if there was going to be something. I went to the Harlequins rugby club in England for a brief period of time because I had an injury contract that came up. And I remember just wanting to go there and do that just to almost fall back in love with the game. So I'd been a bit disillusioned before that because of the whole year that had happened. And I remember having to go to the UK in the depths of winter, which was interesting. First time over there, so that was good. And a really cool experience living in London with Lizzie for a small period of time there. But almost like falling back in love with the game. And I had a few opportunities to stay abroad over there, but the opportunity came up to come back to the Force. And I think how it all finished was a real motivator to come back and be, potentially part of it. But the main thing that really appealed to me was the chance to be part of a rebuild of a club from the ground up, which really excited me professionally to be part of that and to use the experiences I'd had from when I played club in Brisbane. We went through a rebuild. When we were at the Brumbies, went through a rebuild, and obviously we had a good foundation at the Western Force before we sort of got cut there. So I just thought it was a really exciting opportunity. And then obviously the emotional side, being part of rebuilding the club, and the main driver was to keep the pathway alive for young boys and girls to chase their dream to play for the Western Force and hopefully the Wallabies and the Wallaroos one day. That was a real deciding factor for me, and a real motivator was to help keep that pathway alive. So a young Ian Pryor who's 6 or 7 or 8 can become a Western Force player down the track if he wants to, if he's playing at Soaks as a junior, because that's what I wanted to do when I was growing up, like playing in Queensland in a small rugby club called Redlands Rugby, the mighty Mud Crabs, shout out the Mud Crabs, wanting to be a Queensland Red down the track. And I had that to aspire towards. So I wanted to be part of a group that could help keep that alive over here in WA. And then, was lucky enough to get offered a contract to come back, and, had hopes and aspirations of being part of maybe the leadership group and things like that. And then the head coach at the time, Tim Sanson, great man, messaged me, said, hey, can we catch up for a coffee? Didn't think anything of it. Just thought he was only 2 weeks into the job, that he might want to ask about the history of the club, whatever it may be. And that's when he asked me to be skipper, which was, almost caught me off guard a little bit, but it was a really proud moment to, be recognised in that capacity. And it was a really exciting opportunity that I wanted to really sink my teeth into with both hands and really get stuck into.
And you did. And I remember, like in that time of I'd been grown up with soccer, I'd grown up with AFL, but I became so involved in rugby because of the connection of work and being friends with you guys, and loved watching the culture change and how much work goes into, not only being a captain, but after this team has had such devastating news and had to, go down to the depths and then rebuild and maintain that kind of the joy that could come from rugby without the fear of what could happen again. I remember, you and Marcel, there was Marcel, Peck, Cohen, and all of those around, watching you guys doing the singing in the change rooms and celebrating, and even when there was a loss, making sure that you're lifting each other up. As a captain, what was your ethos in maintaining that team culture through a loss, through a win, through a challenge, people through injuries, and going back to what you were speaking about, how a team is made up of a lot of assets?
Yeah.
How did you keep the vibe high? How did you keep everybody on board, whilst also keeping, like that weight of the world on your shoulders at bay?
Yeah, I guess the ultimate goal was to create an environment that people are excited to come to work within. A, to challenge themselves. B, to feel like they were valued and safe in that environment, and that they were working towards a goal that they really connected to. So there's a few pieces there. So the main one was obviously we tried to instill a lot of ownership within the squad. So and we were lucky that we were rebuilding, so we could do that. So we said, okay, this is our goal. But how are we going to get there? What does that look like from a values point of view? And we got the whole team to build up that values framework, and that way it helped with the ownership of it. So they're responsible for it as well, not just they're coming in being told what to do and then you sort of like got to abide by it or not. But okay, well, you guys helped put us together and helped us facilitate this. Now we've got to lead it as a group. It's not just up to 1, 2, or 3 players to do that. So first and foremost, it was that. Secondly, came down to recruiting the right people. So we were looking for people that were driven, self-motivated, wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves, and had a point to prove. Like we wanted people that wanted to come and better themselves as both players, but also as human beings as well, and to create an environment for that. And then almost as a leadership group, we wanted to almost make ourselves almost redundant, essentially, because that was our type of leadership model, was that we want to create leaders within leaders, so that if a captain or a leader gets knocked out in a game, whatnot, that next person can just step up because they know what we're about, how we operate, and how we can go from there. So those were our goals. And then the way we tried to do it was always we had a mantra of setting the standard. So the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. So what does that look like from the way you interact with your teammates, coaches, the general public, sponsors, and just generally, are you being a good human? Like that was what it all came down to, was just being a good human, trying to look after both yourselves and your teammates from a care perspective. So care about your craft, care about your jersey, care about the organisation and the pathway. And then, I think as a leader, there's a few things that you have to be able to. You have to have, decent integrity. So, I'm not going to ask someone to do something that I wouldn't be able to do, or wouldn't be willing to do as a leader. You've got to have an approachability so that people feel comfortable approaching you, because you can't be everywhere as leader. You can't have your eyes on everyone. You're gonna miss things. But if you have other people, looking for things that might relate to the values that you guys uphold, is really important. And then if you're approachable, they're able to come and say, hey, so and so might need a hand with this, or have we thought about improving this procedure and things like that, because more sets of eyes on more things creates more opportunity for improvement and problem solving. And I guess, so we talked about integrity, we've talked about that approachability, and then humility as well is a massive factor, I think. We've all worked with leaders that don't have that humility, and it's really hard to sustain that position as a leader when you don't have those few aspects, I think. And I think humility is a big one, not just for how you conduct yourself with other people, but almost that ability to always see improvement in yourself and to seek improvement in yourself through that humility. Like, no, I can actually do this better, or maybe there is a bit of improvement we can do as a team or an organisation here, or a few of the core ones, to be able to, set the standard and to start with leading yourself before you can lead others.
And that's the thing, it's like inspiring people to want to be that for themselves. So, speaking on what you've touched on there, say you've got like a problem staff member, or there's a player who isn't showing up with integrity, humility and all the values that you've kind of set. You've done the choosing. They seemed like they were going to be great when they came, but something's obviously going up. How do you approach those situations or players as a captain now working in leadership, or what's your advice to people when they've got somebody who's clearly not kind of showing up the way that the expectation has been set?
Yeah, so start with the person first. So you've got to, check in, like, how's everything going? Is everything okay? Is there something going on outside of these four walls that is contributing to this? So that's the first one, to check in, and that's that care factor as a leader, like actually caring about the people you're looking after and showing that you care, because then that person's going to naturally build that trust with you. And then the next thing I'd say would be awareness. Like, is that individual aware that what they're doing is having an impact on, X, Y, and Z or so-and-so? Because sometimes people aren't aware. Like, sometimes we get so busy in our lives and we get, can be a bit monotonous and can chip away at the corners on certain things, and all of a sudden you're doing a behavior that you didn't realize is impacting others. You just think it's part of what you do day to day. And they might not be aware. They might, oh, hang on, sorry, I didn't realize that. And we had an example of a player, before I got to a certain team that was quite renowned for being a little bit late. And, he was a bit more of a cruisier guy. He wasn't doing it with any malice or anything, but the coach at the time made him aware, like, hey, do you realize that what this is technically saying to your teammates potentially is that your time is more important than theirs? It was almost like a light bulb went off in his head. He was like, oh, wow, I never thought of it like that. That's not at all what I'm doing. I'm just, a bit lackadaisical. I'm not as punctual as probably other people. I'm a bit of a surfy, this kind of thing. But from that moment on, he was never late again. He was one of the first in the meeting. Just that awareness as a leader to say, hey, are you aware, like almost put that little bit of a mirror that this is potentially having an impact. So I think those are the first two things. And then given that person the chance to work on it and improve on it, if it is something that's maybe a bit of a shortcoming or perceived shortcoming in their life, is giving that chance to work on it as well, and giving them the tools and the frameworks to be able to work on that is another big one, I think, too.
I love that.
Yep.
So you've spoken about Ian Pryor, you've spoken about the different teams you've played for and the roles that you're in now. I know that from all the conversations that I've had, friends that I've, seen go through the transition, what did the transition look like from being Ian Pryor, partner with Lizzie, to being a father? And how did it change how you showed up in everything that you did?
Yeah, I guess it's a great question. I think I'm still navigating it now, to be fair, like most parents, making it up on the run. I remember going from, Riley, our firstborn, being in hospital, and you got the midwives there and the nurses, everything's on call there for you to help out, because there's no like apprenticeship or degree you can do to help you for this parenthood thing, to driving home with Riley, your first child, and you're like, look at each other, you're like, wow, we're responsible for this human now. Like, do we actually know what we're doing here? Or,
who let us do this?
Yeah, what are we going to do? So immediately the first thing is like responsibility, right? Like, and there's some interesting studies around changes in hormonal profiles, parents-wise, like once you do have your first child and things like that, how that shifts a little bit. But yeah, I just remember having that sense of responsibility, like, yeah, okay, like obviously you're responsible for yourself and your partner, you're a team together, but now you got this other human that's very dependent. And it's interesting when you think about us as mammals compared to other animals, like how useless we are when we are born. We can't run, we can't walk, we can't do anything when we're born. We're just these dependent little creatures. So having that responsibility and just that overriding joy factor, like you're in a bit of a bubble for those first few weeks, like seeing first movements, seeing all the little rolls on the legs and the arms of the little one is pretty special. But then almost being like, okay, I better get to work now. I better really, look after myself and our family to make sure we're providing here and, giving this little human the life it deserves and the best one we can give it. So, still, I think like most parents, you feel like you're getting pulled from every angle, personally, professionally, as a dad, as a husband. So you never feel like you're quite doing anything perfectly or quite right. But, like a lot of things that we've discussed with sport and life, like as long as the effort's there, and the reflection part to, okay, I didn't get it right today, what can I do better tomorrow? And because we are human, we make mistakes, and having a bit of empathy for yourself on top of having a bit of drive to be like, yep, I reckon I can do that better, is probably a big one. And then, everyone's so busy now, and we're so busy as parents, and everyone's busy in society at the moment, actually taking time to sit down and connect, with your kids, with your wife, with your friends. It's not easy, but it takes time, right? Like it takes conscious effort to be able to do it. You need to create space for that. And if you don't, it flies by. Like, already half a decade in of being a father, and it feels like it's gone like that. The days just blend into one, and the weeks and the years. So, never taking it for granted. Doing the work and making sure you're taking time to connect, I think, are the big three there.
I love all of that. And, speaking about all the things that we've touched on today, you're now working for Medal Global. You've had so much experience of being an athlete, of being a leader. And what are the biggest things, I suppose, in the conversations that you're having with the people that you're doing the leadership training with? What are the three things that you find are the most consistent thing that people need advice on?
There's plenty, and it's been great to start off with Medal Global, and really interesting work, and some really great people to learn from and work with, and in the team there. But I guess what it comes down to is, as humans, we're complex, right? Like, we're not all stereotype this or that, and we're these really complex, ambiguous organisms that there's no particular playbook you can just roll out for everyone, right? Can't just box us in. So I guess the dynamicism, if that's a word, the dynamics of it, of leadership and what that entails, and how people, and we go through our careers and we get really technically competent, and now all of a sudden we get to a leadership position. Now we're responsible for 1, 2, 5, 10, 100 people, and how that works, right? And that having that leadership proficiency as well as that technical proficiency is really important. So how do you build that out? What does that look like? And creating awareness around that framework is a big one. The other part I've been really fascinated by is the resilience piece. So Ben Pronk, Tim Curtis, and Dr. Dan Pronk co-authored the book The Resilience Shield. So we deliver a lot of workshops and keynotes and facilitation around those kind of concepts there, and just how resilience can be worked on, like leadership. It's not you're born with it or you're born without it. It's always something you can build on, you can work on, and keep chipping away at to try and improve yourself as, an individual, a leader, a family man, a brother, whatever it may be, a friend. I've really enjoyed that aspect as well. So it's been really meaningful work to be able to have some small contribution to people that might be looking to improve themselves from a leadership perspective, a resilience perspective, or a teamwork perspective.
Speaking on that, what's a lesson that took you the longest to learn?
Lesson that took me the longest to learn, and this might sound simple, is be patient. Be patient. It's a underestimated and probably underappreciated thing in today's society, with how fast-paced we are and how much things are evolving. But, we all want immediate results. We all want to put in the work, get the immediate result, immediate gratification, and flow on from there to the next thing, bigger and better. But, the snowball that's going down the mountain doesn't start as a big snowball, does it? It starts as a tiny bit, and it rolls and it gets bigger, and it starts off really slow momentum-wise, but as it gets bigger, it gets heavier, it's moving faster and moving faster. And when I reflect back on my career, started my career, really wanted it to happen tomorrow. I wanted to be in the Wallabies tomorrow. I wanted to do this, do that tomorrow, and achieve all these things so quickly. But you've got to A, put in the work, and then B, be patient. It takes time. It might not happen on the first attempt or the 10th attempt or the 50th attempt. Like, I think the overall learning from my career is, my wife calls it stubbornness. I call it probably perseverance, but that ability to put in the work, be patient, remain optimistic about it's going to work out and things are going to happen, and being able to pivot and self-reflect within that. But yeah, I think the overarching one is just be patient. It doesn't happen overnight. All the best success stories in the world don't happen overnight. It takes time and repeated effort, whatever it may be, personal, professional, societal, whatever it may be. So I think patience is a big one.
What a beautiful way to finish off and to wrap up all of those nuggets that we got from you today. It's such a blessing to have you in to speak about the lessons that you've learned over life and, the challenges that you've been through. Thank you for being through those challenges. Thank you for choosing to go down this path instead of going down a different one. How can people find you? Where can people reach out to you now?
First of all, thanks for having me on. Thanks for listening to me ramble. Hope people get one or two things out of it. That's a win in my regard. But so Metal Global's where I work now, obviously. So we have a website that people can approach us on. Otherwise, don't have a very big social media profile, but Ian Pryor on Twitter and Instagram. Otherwise, that's about it, really. I'm pretty low key, just trying to be a good dad and a good husband, and trying to play a little bit of sport on the side as navigate the real world.
And nailing it. Thank you so much, Ian. And if you guys have enjoyed the podcast, if you've taken anything away, not even if, because you've taken something away, if you want to share that with other people, if you want to hear more nuggets, or if there are any questions that you want to ask myself or Ian, please reach out. Make sure that you, share the episode, and we'd love to hear from you with any questions. Thank you for listening to the Resource Podcast, where we are making the ripple effect, and the ripple effect is making waves. Thanks for joining us.